America has long shown an incredible generosity of spirit, welcoming refugees and offering them safe haven. Indeed, I am the son of a refugee who fled prison and torture in Cuba and came to America seeking freedom. But our immigration laws are not a suicide pact. The refugee program should not become a vehicle for terrorists to come murder innocent Americans. And I think a great many Americans are deeply concerned by the willful blindness of this administration to the threat of radical Islamic terrorism. That was characterized powerfully just a few minutes ago when our Democratic colleague, Senator Al Franken, said we should not even ask refugees if they are Muslims. If one is trying to prevent radical Islamic terrorists from coming in, the suggestion from my Democratic colleague that we shouldn't even ask, to me, is nuts. As we look at this, what is happening in Syria and what's happening in the Middle East, ISIS is evil. They are waging a war of genocide against Christians. They are murdering Jews. They are murdering fellow Muslims. And yet, the refugee program, as administered by this administration, seems to have an enormous preference for Syrian Muslim refugees and seems to actively keep out Syrian Christian refugees. In 2014, the Obama administration admitted 249 refugees from Syria. 224 of those, 89.9%, were Muslim. Only 13 were Christian, 5.2%. In 2015, the Obama administration admitted 2,192 refugees from Syria. 2,149 were Muslim, that's 98%. And only 29, 1.3%, were Christian. In 2016, to date, the Obama administration has admitted 11,717 refugees from Syria. Of those, 11,624 were Muslim, that's 99.2%. And 49 were Christian, that's 4.1%. All told, since 2011, 14,267 Syrian refugees had been admitted to the United States, and more than 14,000 of them were Muslim. Fewer than 100 were Christian. Now, those numbers are not even close to the proportional population in Syria. Syria, the pre-war population, 10% of the population of Syria was Christian. And yet, 0.68% of the refugees being admitted by the administration are Christian. Mr. Henshaw, why is the administration admitting such a disproportionately low number of Christian refugees?
Our admittance of refugees is based on vulnerabilities, of which religious persecution is one of them. Syrian refugees, though Christians were 10% of the pre-war Syrian population, they're only about 1% of the number of refugees that are fled. We believe there are a number of reasons for this. One of them is that many of the Christians still reside in Syria in government-controlled areas and Alawite areas. They were located in there beforehand. We have our program, however, is ready to take any Christian who comes into the system. One of the other difficulties we face is that some of the Christians who have fled to Lebanon, and our program is relatively small there, but we're trying to build it up.
Do you agree that ISIS is persecuting Christians and endeavoring and would like to endeavor to wage genocide against them?
Yes, and Muslims and Jews and any other person that disagrees with them, absolutely. So we've started a program to include in our refugee program Syrians who are waiting for immigrant visas based on relatives in the United States. There are a number of Syrians that have pending immigrant visas on
All right,
waiting
let me,
lists.
let me shift to another question.
Could I just add
my
one?
time is expiring, and I want to ask another question of your colleague. Mr. Rodriguez, the House of Representatives recently obtained a leaked internal DHS document, a memorandum, that basically admits that refugee fraud is, quote, easy to commit yet not easy to investigate. Are you familiar with this memorandum?
I think I know the memorandum. If you have it, would you be willing to share it with me? Because I want to make sure we're talking about the same document. May I see it?
Have it right here.
Yeah, it is the document that I thought it was. This is not, this is a draft document. It is my understanding that was never issued. We believe it was prepared in 2012. Whoever wrote this didn't know what they were talking about. For this simple reason, they assumed that we were not collecting fingerprints, that we were not taking photographs, and that we were not conducting interviews of refugees. In fact, even back then and well before that, all three of those activities were occurring for every single refugee over the age of 14 years old and every single refugee.
So you don't know who prepared this document?
I don't know who prepared this document.
Well, I would appreciate your answering to the committee in writing after this hearing. You ought to be able to find out who prepared this document.
Oh, I would like to know, because whoever it was deeply misinformed.
I mean, I would note that it's got the DHS letterhead at the top, and the memorandum says, and I'm quoting from it, ICE's refugee program is particularly vulnerable to fraud due to loose evidentiary requirements, where at times the testimony of an applicant alone is sufficient for approval. As a result, a range of bad actors who use manufactured histories, biographies, and other false statements, as well as produce and submit facetious supporting documentation, have exploited this program. And the memo goes on to note that in many instances, the applicant for a benefit, including both asylum and refugee status, receives a government-issued document that contains the biographic information that the applicant supplied. This document can then be used for many things, such as obtaining a driver's license. Now, this strikes me as a recipe for fraud, that if we are allowing refugees to come in without supporting information, tell us who they claim to be, and we're letting them in, despite the fact that the director of the FBI has told us they cannot vet these refugees to make sure they're not terrorists, how can we possibly be confident that the refugees coming in are not, in fact, terrorists seeking to murder innocent Americans?
What I am telling you is that I would not give that document a whole lot of credit, because whoever that person was did not do the homework to learn about our process. We can talk about real gaps, real issues, real areas of risk. That document was written by somebody who did not take the time to familiarize themselves
Do you
with our
disagree with the passage I read, though?
I disagree.
So is it true or false that the testimony of the applicant alone can be sufficient for approval?
It is considered, it depends on the case. Usually we do have extensive documentation. Syrians in particular present with extensive documentation, passports, military records. So there is documentation that we review. If, in fact, if you come to one of our refugee settlement centers, you'll see piles of documents
Mr. Rodriguez,
on the
it's a
table.
very simple question. My time is expired, but I just would like to get an answer to this question. Is it true or false that the testimony of the applicant alone can be sufficient for approval?
There are cases where the testimony is not necessarily corroborated by documents, but it is always tested against country conditions and other information. That's why it doesn't lend itself in the way that you're asking the question, Senator.
Are you saying it's true or you're saying it's false? I'm just trying to understand.
No, I am acknowledging that, yes, testimony can be the basis for the grant of a refugee, but it needs to be tested against other information that we know about the country conditions at a minimum.
Thank you, sir.
Well, Mr. Rodriguez,